today are mainly based on a chapter that I'm in the process of completing for a book that I'm writing about the Kisan Sabha, the Kisan Andolan. As you already noticed, there's been a lot of work done on Swamiji. I would add that my own professor, Guru Walter उसका pioneering work है स्वामी जी के बारे में 1961 उसका PhD dissertation about the peasant movement Kisan Andolan or more of a political history of the Kisan Andolan. And there's been much work done on the Swami and on the peasant movement. I'm trying to bring a different perspective to the history of the Kisan movement. I would say, if I were to summarize very quickly, I'm trying to engage in more of a micro-historical approach. As you heard, I recently published a book. It's out in the UK and in the US, about 1857, the rebellion, mutiny, revolt of 1857. And that was a very much, you could say, what new could be said about the revolt of 1857? But I think if one takes a micro-historical approach, then you can find something new to say. And likewise here, with respect to the Kisan movement, I'll be bringing more of a micro-historical approach. I'll be focusing in 4 chapters. This is just to sort of contextualize my remarks for today. I'll be focusing on 4 distinct episodes that I find very interesting and important in the Kisan movement. First, I'll be focusing on Rahul Sankrityayan, Baba Nagarjun, and also one other Sahityakar whose name is probably not familiar to you. The name is Mahant Dhanraj Puri. And the area that I'll be focusing on is the area of Saran district and Champaran district in 1938-39. So this lecture focused on Sahityakar का योगदान या भूमिका, and the original title, I will remind you, was Yogdan. The title has been reported as Bhumika, but working with the idea of Yogdan, it's very similar. That material really comes out of this first chapter, so I'll be speaking from the first chapter. I should also add very briefly, and then I'll get into my talk, that in addition to writing the micro-history of these 4 episodes, and there are 3 others that I won't burden you with, but those 3 other chapters take us right to the death of Swamiji in 1950, and his internment in the Samadhi, where he took Samadhi at the ashram. I'll also be describing the ashram, the Sitaram ashram, to some extent. I think there's a need for a history of the ashram itself, which hasn't really been fully appreciated. Both the ashram as it was established in the 1920s with the donation of Sitaram Das and the creation of the trust, but also its subsequent history and its evolution into the nerve center of the Kisan Sabha, and then after Swamiji's death and the condition of the ashram and how it changed and how it's recently been rejuvenated. So I will say that the trust itself will be a part of that history. I'm also interested in the subsequent history of the records, the archive of the ashram. So this, in a sense, takes us from 1950 to 1957, when Walter Hauser discovered the materials for American historians. And then, as you all well know, transported some of those materials to the United States, which is a decision that was taken not lightly, but it was an important decision, in part because it led to the preservation of much important material. And then the decision by Walter and Kailashji to bring back those materials to Bihar, to the ashram. And it's those materials that I'm working in today. I never had a chance when I was a student of Walter Hauser to see those materials. This is the first time that I've been able to actually investigate those materials. Okay, so to begin, let me say that there are several ways one can approach the idea of the contribution of Sahityakar ka Yogdan. First, there's an obvious approach, which is how did the Sahityakars themselves physically take part in the Kisan Andolon? We've already heard a little bit about that with respect to the Sonpur School of Politics in 1938, when there were many renowned figures, including and Nagarjuna himself, just returned from Sri Lanka, from Ceylon, from his monastic studies. So that's an important kind of contribution. Their physical involvement of people like Rahul and Vichla, Ram Brikshvenipuri, and Nagarjuna. And I would add to this list, there are many others, but also Mahant Dhanrajpuri. I'm just curious, how many people here have heard of Mahant Dhanrajpuri as a Sahityakar? Apas mein koi kabhi suna hai unka naam? One. So he's not a well-known figure, but he was an important figure in the Kisan movement in Champaran district in 1938-39. And then, as you'll see, he joined the forward bloc as well and but he was also an important writer. There's a second approach one can take towards the contribution of writers, literateurs to the peasant. And that second approach would be to think about how their writing, the actual gavya or upanyas or katha, how the literary output of the Sahityakar contributed to a broader public awareness of the struggles of the Kisan. And of course, this expands the idea of the movement, the Andolan, not simply to the 1920s and 30s, but a much longer time frame, right? And here we can then include writers like we've already mentioned, Renu, Dinkar, Premchand, and others, many others who have contributed to a greater awakening and an understanding among the broader public about agrarian conditions, peasant life, peasant movements, etc. A third approach to this question of Sahityakar ka Yogdan revolves around the question of who was a writer, who do we count as a writer? Usually it's figures like Nagarjuna or Rahul or Premchand or Renu or even Dhanrajpuri. But the Swami himself was an important writer. Swami Sahajanand Saraswati. B.B. Mishra, the famous historian, was involved in the Kisan movement in Saran district. During the Amwadi Satyagraha that was already mentioned, he was an important contributor as the General Secretary of the Chapra Kisan Sabha. And it was his efforts in particular that publicized the Amwadi encounter of Rahul and Rahul's the assault on Rahul by the landlords Mahava in 1939 on February 24. It was B.B. Mishra who wrote up all the press releases and sent them to Janta, to Amrita Bazar Patrika, to Hunkar, and even from there to other bigger English language dailies. In fact, so these are writers as well, and so we can maybe expand the category of who constitutes a writer. fourth approach is to ask how the direct participation in the Kisan movement influenced the writers themselves. So this turns around the idea of Yogdan. The idea of Yogdan in the title is the writer's influence and contribution to Kisan Andolan. Lekin ye baat hai, ye idea is that what's the Kisan Andolan's contribution to the writers and their oeuvre, their work. And here I think Nagarjuna and Rahul and Rajpuri perhaps are particularly important, but especially Nagarjuna and Rahul, because they were directly, physically involved in the activism, at least in Saran and Champaran. A fifth approach would be to reflect on, and this is a more abstract and more meta-theoretical question, on whether the interests that stimulated the literary output of our writers also shaped their physical involvement in the movement. In other words, I would ask, why did our Sahityakars, particularly Rahul and Nagarjuna, in the context of Prasad and Champaran, why did they choose to involve themselves in the Kisan Andolan in the way that they did? And that's a bigger question that tries to get inside the head, inside the dimag, the brains of and the thoughts and the world of the writers themselves. And I think in the case of these writers, I think we have some access, in part because of the records that Kailashji brought back, the Walter Hauser materials of the ashram that I'm now actually going through, and it's a fascinating body of letters and reports, and it'll be wonderful when this is all digitized and made available there. So I propose to address all of these questions in my short time before you, and I'm already taking too long, so I'll probably have to speed up or cut here and there. But I'm mostly drawing on the Saran and Champaran districts, and also I would say that my own interests in microhistory make me gravitate towards the last definition that I just described, getting inside the heads of these writers to see how it shaped their own involvement in the Kisan Andolan. And also the first, that is, well, what was their involvement? We know the basics. For some reason, we've come to know certain things, or common knowledge about Rahul and Amwari and Nagarjun and Sonpur, and Nagarjun was also at Amwari, and they both get arrested. We know basic things, but we don't know a lot up till now, I think. And so I'll be thinking about that. Okay. You all know the history of the Kisan Andolan. I won't spend much time on recounting the sort of general context of the Kisan Andolan. Aapko malum hoga is sabke baare mein. But I would just say that the history of the Kisan movement, the Kisan Sabha movement, was first told by Swami Sahajananda Saraswati himself. And especially in his memoir, Mera Jivan Sangharsh, which was published after his death in 1952. We should ask, with any memoir, one has to think about, why is he telling us the things he's telling us in a particular way he's telling us those things? And also, why was it after his life that it was published? Why not during? He wrote most of it by 1942. It was complete. He could have published it right away, but he chose not to. So these are interesting questions. I would say also, that Mera Jivan Sangharsh has been republished many times in Hindi. It was first translated into English by Walter Hauser and Kailash Jha, the academic edition, as well as a popular edition. So the general contours of the Swami's leadership of the Kisan Sabha is well known. And likewise, with Walter's PhD thesis, the political nature of the movement socialists and the left, sort of alphabet soup of movements and parties on the left, whether the Congress Socialists or the Communist Party, or the HSRA, the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, and the Forward Bloc. We know about, from Walter's work, we have a pretty good sense of that pioneering dissertation. And then, of course, much has been written since then as well. Let me jump ahead a little bit, because some of this you already know, and I'm already behind in my remarks, and I don't want to keep you here too long. So, and there's more to be said. It's also well known that Swamiji in 1939 by 1939 he was also himself gravitating toward the left, and he was being influenced heavily by both Congress Socialists as well as members of the Communist Party of India and Bihar, which was formed in 1939. Members who were there included, it was formed at Mongir on the strength of Karyanand Sharma's work in Koragiatal. I think the date was October 1939. B.B. Mishra was also there. B.B. Mishra, the name might be familiar, should be familiar to you, because not only was he secretary of the Kisan Sabha in Chapra in 39, but he became a prominent historian. He taught at Patna University, Delhi University, he did his PhD in London. And he was also briefly in the early 1950s the director of the Bihar State Archives. So it's, he's an important figure. But anyway, the 39 was the creation of the the Communist Party of Bihar, and then also in 1939 the Forward Bloc. And of course, it's well known that the Swami and Subhash Chandra Bose joined forces. Were opposing what they termed the imperialist war. And because of that, Swamiji, along with many others, was in prison in April of 1940 and was in jail. And of course, famously, when Nazi Germany when Hitler in his wisdom decided to invade the Soviet Union in June of 1941, a moment that's remembered as Operation Barbarossa, this event prompted the communist, the left in general, but especially the Communist Party high command, to decide to question whether they should rethink their characterization, their understanding of World War II as an imperialist war. And of course, very famously, by the end of 1941, beginning of 1942, the left and the communists, not the Congress Socialists, most on the left, had just done an about-face and declared it a people's war. And as a result, Swamiji and many others were released from prison. Okay. Also in prison with the Swami was, of course, the great polymath and Buddhist Rahul Sankrityayan. And this is, of course, known to many of you. I almost feel ridiculous telling you all this because you know all this. In any case, Rahul is generally and rightly regarded as one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, and his many feats of physical and intellectual achievements make it extremely difficult to categorize him. He was, of course, well known as a Buddhist scholar, but he was also very famous for his journeys into Tibet and his efforts to revitalize Buddhism in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and beyond. Just jumping ahead a little bit, he also was in, and of course Swamiji was in jail as well. And what's interesting is, and one of the things that interests me in the book that I'm writing, and this will be the focus of one of the chapters, is they were both in jail, and they were both writing their memoir. So Rahul wrote the first 2 volumes of Meri Jivan Yatri in jail, recounting his Tibet travels, his travels to England, to the Soviet Union, his life, and also ultimately he also II tells how he then, when he comes back from Tibet in late 1938, in October, November of 1938, he returns from his last journey to Tibet, and decides to rejoin politics, left politics. And Swami, of course, is writing his memoir, and they're both also writing many other texts. I think Kate Mazdur, Jharkhand Ke Kisan, seven or eight different works by the Swami. He had a lot of free time. You know, the Swami had been very busy before going to prison, leading the Kisan Sabha. But once he gets into prison, suddenly he's confronted with all this free time, and so he's writing. He also writes the first draft of his Gita Hriday volume, which is often regarded as a Marxist commentary on the Gita, but as the scholar, the late Kubernath Rai, has argued, it's more than that and less than that at the same time. I highly recommend Kubernath Rai's work on the Swami, including his chapters on the Gita. Okay. We know from Rahul's memoir and from contemporary news reports that Rahul had decided to join the Kisan struggle upon his return from Tibet in 1938. And that in February of 1939 he led a satyagraha, a famous satyagraha, at a village called Amwadi, which is on the far western side of what used to be called Saran district. It's now called Siwan district. During the Amwadi Satyagraha, Rahul famously engaged in a very public act of civil disobedience, and this is partly why it's called a Satyagraha, by cutting sugarcane on a disputed piece of land. Despite being confronted by a sizable landlord army that had been sent there, armed with lathis and backed up by 2 elephants. After he cut some cane, he was quickly arrested by the police, to whom he'd given prior notice. The police knew this was going to happen. The police were also there. They immediately arrested him. At the same time, roughly simultaneously, the Mahavat, the landlord's Mahavat, the elephant keeper and driver, assaulted Rahul and hit him over the head with the lathi. And of course it was a serious wound and much blood. And there was much discussion in the records about which event happened first. Was the arrest first, or did the Mahavat attack Rahul first? And if the arrest was first, then it was the police's responsibility to protect the body of Rahul. And so Rahul insisted that it was the arrest happened first, and then the Mahavat. The police, of course, argued otherwise, and they went back and forth, both in official reports as well as in the press. And Bibi Mishra, again, was very diligent in insisting, making sure that the news of the arrest, the assault, Rahul then mounts a hunger strike in prison to demand better treatment for political prisoners, amongst whom should be included many of the ordinary Sadharan Bhakti Kisan, not just the big leaders, but everyone, all the Kisans arrested should be treated as political prisoners. And so Bibi Mishra made sure that this news was going out, that this great scholar, this great Tibetologist, an explorer, a Buddhist, and a devotee of nonviolence was being so badly treated by the British administration. And, this information reached far and wide. So, it's not surprising that there's more information in Rahul's memoir about Amwadi Satyagraha than there is in Swamiji's memoir. Swamiji does mention it, but it's one of many key movements, and Swamiji spends a lot of time focusing on the Leora, the Prakash struggles of Yadananda Sharma, as well as Mongir, does mention Amwari, and he mentions Rahul as a very key figure. He also mentions one Ram Briksh, but it's not Ram Briksh Benipuri. It's Brahmachari Ram Briksh, or Ram Briksh Brahmachari, a different Ram Briksh, who comes from Sabalpur, near Hajipur, Sonpur. And actually next week, Kailashji and I will go to Siwan and visit, so try and find some of these places to see, because we both believe firmly in the importance of actually visiting physically the places that you're writing about, because you never know what interesting information. So, we know quite a bit about Rahul after this event, of course, because of his memoir, but we also know from the memoir an important detail, which is